Hi folks, welcome to Creative Making. I'm Pete, and in this video I'm going to do some experimentation in eye making. Okay then, before we get into the video, I just wanted to talk a little bit about eye making. It's something that I've done before on various film and TV productions, and it's something that I really enjoy. Normally when I'm making eyes for a production, there's a couple of bits of equipment that I'll always have, and that's a vacuum degasser and a pressure pot. The vacuum degasser sucks air out of resin and silicone and stuff like that, and the pressure pot squeezes any remaining bubbles tiny so you can't see them. I don't have those bits of equipment here, so what I thought I'd do is I'd do some experimentation and see if there's a way that you can still make bubble-free eyes at home. There's a few different things I've tried in this project. I've tried 3D printing, digital modeling, and I've used a few different materials as well, but I'll explain that as we go through the video. So yeah, so let's have a look and see what happens. Right, so for these particular eyes I've decided to use Fusion 360 to model them. It's the first time I've used it, and I've got a new 3D printer, so I thought I'd give it a go. So here you can see the inner eye. I've got the top there that represents the iris and the pupil, and this is the base, which is very, very important. You see there's 3 vertical grooves and a horizontal groove there. I'll explain what they're for in a second. So this is the base with the outer eye. You see it's slightly bigger, and there's a corneal bulge at the top there. And that's the eye without the base. There's the base again. And there we are, the outer eye on the base. Now the base is very, very important. If you notice, the base is exactly the same for the inner eye and the outer eye. And we can see here the vertical grooves act as keys to locate it rotationally, and then there's that groove around the outside, horizontal, that acts as like a press stud, so it snaps into the mould. So here's the base with the inner eye. And here's the base, same base with the outer eye. And if you combine those both together, in this illustration you can see how the inner eye fits within the outer eye. Once I was happy with that model, then I put it into slicing software called Chitubox, and I got them all set up on my print volume, added supports, saved it, and then put it into my machine. I'm using an Elegoo Mars Pro, and the resin that I'm using here is Elegoo ABS-like resin. Okay, so there they are all printed. I just need to take them off that base now, give them a clean with some isopropyl alcohol. And then once that's done, I need to post-cure them. And to do that, I put them in this ultraviolet curing station. They're in there for about 6 minutes. So these are the printed eyes, all clean and all cured. And I just need to clean off the support structure and give them a bit of a sanding. Once that's done, I need to just give them a little sand, get them all cleaned up. For that, I just put a 6mm drill bit in my drill, and I screwed the eyeballs on, and then I just used sanding sticks and sandpaper to get those smoothish. And then once I'd done that, I gave them a layer of Halford's clear lacquer. This is just to give them a nice shiny smooth coat, as you can see there. So once that lacquer's dry, I need to make a mould. So I draw a line on this cup with a Sharpie, and then I completely ignore it and cut the top of the cup off. This mould making is very, very simple, same as what I've done in previous videos. So I just glue the eye forms into the bottom of the cups with some super glue. and I'm using Mold Star 30 on this. It's a condensation cure silicone and it's equal parts A and B. And the reason I'm using condensation cure silicone is because addition cure silicone can get inhibited by the 3D prints. So I'll give it a good old stir. Pour out the amount that I need. And then give the other part a good old stir. Pour that out, and then my favourite bit's coming up here. Give it a good old mix, lovely. So once that's done, I don't have a vacuum degasser, so I'm just going to pour that on from a height, and that will stretch any big bubbles and pop those. And then because it's a reasonably slow curing silicone, any small bubbles will eventually rise out. So you'll see here in a second the importance of that base, because once I've cleaned the moulds up, you'll see that I'll actually take the inner eye and pop it into the outer eye moulds. So that's the mould for the outer eye, that's the inner eye. There we go, pop it in, and because the base is the same, it fits perfectly. Okay, so this is the mould for the inner eye. You can see the flat iris there, and you can see those white dots on there. They're just bits of filler that I didn't manage to mix up in the silicone earlier on. So I'm going to cast out some blanks, and for this I'm going to use Smooth Cast 326 EU. It's a transparent urethane fast cast, and I'm going to tint that with So Strong pigments. Now, I was talking to a fellow eye maker recently, and he mentioned that somebody he knows makes the whites of his eyes using light grey resin. So I thought I'd give it a try, and this is what I'm going to do here. So I've got part of the fast cast in this cup, and I'm just going to use white and black to create a very, very pale grey. This pigment's really strong, so if you get it anywhere, you'll get it everywhere. So just be careful. I should be wearing gloves for all of this, but like an idiot, I didn't. So if you're going to try this, make sure you wear gloves. I do have a mask on. So I've put way too much black in there, so I just put a bit more white until I've got it a lot paler. And there you can see in the cup it looks pale grey, and on the stick it looks white almost. Add the other part of the resin. Again, please wear gloves. Okay, so here I pour the resin in, and I'll pour it into the mould first of all, and then I'll pour it back out again. This is really to help not getting bubbles on the inside of the mould. So once that's in, I'll just leave it to one side and let it cure. Got 1 hour cure time. And there we go. I did 3. It's always good to do 3 because you can see there, one is a lot darker than the other 2. So I ended up making the eyes on those 2 because they kind of match. And while I was casting those, I made a second mould for the outer eye. Okay, so before we start painting, I just need to clean these casts up. I'm just going to go ahead and use some permagrit tools to sand the bottom of those off, and some sandpaper. Again, safety first, you must wear a mask on this. I'm lucky enough to have a over the bench extractor, which I had on, and also I had a 3M respirator. So there we go, just sanding the bejesus out of them and getting those bases nice and flat. You could do a lot of this when you're casting the pieces actually, when you pour the resin in, let it stand for a little bit and then kind of scrape across the top of the mould so it removes most of the resin. It just cuts down on this work later on. So sandy, sandy, sand, different grit. And then some sandpaper. And then once that's all done, you should have a really nice smooth bottom there. Cool. Right, just before we start paint, this is the colours, some of the colours that I'm going to use. This is a Bluebird alcohol palette. and it's acrylic colours, but it's dry when it's in its palette form, and then you can add 99% alcohol and it'll activate those colours. They're really cool, really great colours, and they're very subtle. You can see there they're dry. Let's just have a look at some of these colours that are in this palette. I'm just going to use some of my makeup brushes actually, some of the Bedelium makeup brushes. So let's have a look. So we'll stick up in some 99.9% isopropyl alcohol. Just squirt a bit in each of those cells, and we'll have a look at the main colours that I'm going to be using on these eyes. So there we go. So we've got blood. That's the blood colour, subtle. We've got dried blood or aged blood, beetroot, aubergine, and the final one is sunflower. So the great thing about these colours is that they are subtle, but you can use them for all sorts. So just again, we've got blood, aged blood, beetroot, aubergine, and finally sunflower. So to start off with, I've got a really subtle mix, really watery, washy mix, and I'm just going to go around these eyes and just be really soft with my touch. I'll do a layer of colour, let that dry. And then I'll seal that in with this, and this is clear UV resin. So it stays liquid until you blast it with a UV light. I'm just going to destroy one of my very expensive Bedelium brushes. So just need to put a little bit of this on. It doesn't affect the alcohol makeup underneath, but what it does do, it seals it in. If we don't do this, then when we do another layer of alcohol colours, it'll just wash that first layer off. So there you see, I'm just blasting it with a UV light, and that cures that clear resin. And then we'll go on with a slightly darker colour, and we'll just keep repeating that until we've built up the colour, until we're happy with what we've got. So colour on there, and UV resin to seal it all in. Cool. So just before we start the painting section, normally when I'm making eyes, I'll normally use printed irises and pupils. I just find it's a lot easier to control, and often if I'm making eyes for a puppet or a severed head, they need to be very specific, so it's just a lot quicker and easier. So I've decided to try and paint these. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So a bit of sunflower on there. But before I start painting the eyes, I'm going to finish this colour off, and then I'm going to start to put the veins on. So what I use for the veins is just red wool. Now the colours on this video are really vibrant. In actual fact, that red looks like blood red, and the colours that I used on the eyes are a lot less brighter than you see on the video. Anyway, with the wool, I'll just pull this out, tease out little thin bits, and those end up being the veins. I've actually got a box full of these that I spent hours one day just teasing bits of wool out, just to save time later on. So you can see it's very, very subtle, very tiny little veins. It's difficult to do oh, there's the box, look. That took pretty much a whole day. It's always useful to have. So to stick the veins on, I'm using the UV resin, and I'm popping the veins on. Not a great shot, but I'm popping the veins on, and I use a scalpel to move the veins around to get them into the position that I'm looking for. So once I've done that, and I'm happy with that, then I'll just take a torch, I'll burn my finger, But basically that torch is just burning off all the little fluffy bits of vein that we don't want. And they're pretty much ready to start painting. So I'm going to use a mixture of FW inks and Liquitex acrylics. Now the issue with using anything that's water-based when making eyes is that water, that moisture in that paint, even though it's dry, it can affect how the clear resin for the outer eye, how it sticks to it, and it can give you all sorts of weird kind of reactions. So what I'm going to do on this, between every single layer that I paint, I'm going to paint on a thin layer of the UV resin to act as a seal. So to paint them, I've got a little plastic lid as a palette. I've got a tiny little brush. I'll show you that one in a minute. A slightly larger brush. A little mixing cup for my clear resin. Got my clear resin there. My UV torch to cure that resin. And we've got this little thing, which is a great swatch from Cantor and Nissel. Now I did decide to choose an eye to copy, but it didn't work. This is that tiny brush. It's a Japanese brush. You can get them on eBay. They're not cheap. I think they're about £11–12 each, but they're brilliant for this type of stuff. I also use some magnifying glasses because I'm blind as a bat. So this is the eye that I decided to do, but actually as I was going along I just decided to freestyle it because, as I say, I'm not an eye painter, so it wasn't really going my way. And a little bottle of water there. The great thing about that clear resin is it won't cure until you blast it with UV light, which is really good. As I say, I'm not an eye painter and you can pretty much see what's going on here, so I'll just let the video run and see how it goes. So basically I'm trying to build up the layers. So I'll do one layer of colour and then I'll put a layer of the UV resin over it and then just keep repeating that and hopefully it'll build up. Well, the theory is it builds up a more layered iris. The white of the eye is grey. It actually looks a lot more realistic than it would if it was just pure white. So that's a good call. Okay, so I'm going to fill the pupils. Rather than painting them, I'm just going to use a little bit of this resin and I'm going to pigment that resin black. It was something I tried years ago with making some acrylic eyes, and it worked really well to get a good round black pupil. So I thought I'd give it a go on this one. So basically, just mixing those two parts of the resin together. Great thing about this resin is it's transparent, so when you put pigments in, you will get a resin that's the same colour as the pigments. Often with fast cast resins, they turn white as they cure, so of course that would turn this black into a grey resin. So give it a good thorough mix, and then once that's mixed, I'm just going to use a little disposable pipette to give this a try first. Yep, that's good. So here we go. So we'll get the first eye. Just carefully put a drop of resin in there. A little bit more cautious on this one, but we'll get the resin in there, and there you go. They look great. So I'm going to leave that to cure then for an hour. The resin's now cured, and then the last thing I do before I put these in the mould with the clear resin is I'm just going to go over the surface of these with some UV resin just to make sure everything's properly sealed in. I actually ended up painting a couple of layers on this so it was nice and sealed. Now there's an example of not wearing your gloves. I got resin all over my finger. What an idiot. And there they are. So nice and flat and all sealed in and ready for the clear resin. So here we go then, got some mixing cups, got my scales, and I'm going to mix up the resin. I'm using Epoxycast 690 here. It's a 24-hour cure. And the reason I've decided to use that is because I want to give the resin tons of time to cure. So if there's any bubbles in there, oh, there you go, I've got my gloves. So if there's any bubbles trapped in that resin, I can leave it to stand for a little bit and those bubbles will dissipate. So it's important to note when mixing resins, or clear resins particularly, is that when you put your component parts together and start mixing, that clear resin will go a little bit misty, and it's a bit of a worry. But if you keep on mixing and persevere, that mistiness will dissipate and you'll end up with a nice clear resin. So if you're doing this, don't panic, that mistiness is normal. Okay, so I've got my 2 parts poured out there. The ratio for this resin is 10:3. And yeah, I've got my 2 parts poured out there. Just pour them into a bigger container to mix and give it a good thorough mix. We've got loads of time with this resin, so I'm mixing, and then I'll do a bit more mixing just to make sure. Once it's fully mixed, I'll leave it. I actually left this to stand for a couple of hours, and when I came back it was crystal clear. So here we go, time to put these to bed. It's got my mould, got my resin there. Got my eye forms. Now, I don't want to dump this resin into the moulds. I want to be fairly careful with this. So rather than just pouring it in from high, you can see here, I end up slowly pouring the resin in and let it creep down the side of the mould. It's just so it doesn't introduce any more air. And I also overfill these moulds. And then before I put the eyes in, I'm just going to pour a little bit of resin over the front of the eye. And then I'm just going to sit it in the resin. I'll just pop it in, then rotate it a little bit. In hindsight, I should have probably let these guys just sit in there for a little bit longer, maybe an hour. Same with the second eye, just pour a little bit of resin over the front. And then I'll just carefully pop that in there. You'll see the importance of those bases here. I line up those 3 grooves and then you'll see it actually snap into position. There you go, so it's snapped into position, so that isn't going anywhere, that's staying there. So they're both in there now, and now all we have to do is just leave those till that resin cures.
One eternity later.
Okay, 24 hours later, and the resin is cured. This silicone is 30 Shore silicone, so it's fairly firm, which made these a little bit hard to get out of the moulds. But pops it out, that's the first one, and it's not bad. There is a bubble in it, but it's not too bad. I'll go for the second one here. And you can see the disappointment in my reaction. The second one has come out looking very, very strange indeed. Looks like the clear resin is delaminated from the front of the cornea. Not quite sure why that's happened, because both eyes were made with both the same batches of resin, painted at the same time, all that kind of stuff. And there they are. It kind of shows potential. I just need to work out why that second eye did so badly. So, well, there was some success, some disasters, but I think generally the process, the materials seems to work, and it's definitely got potential. After I filmed that video, I was kind of convinced that I could get them to look a bit better, so it's obvious that I'm not an eye painter. That's fine, I need to address that. But so I decided to make another eye using a printed pupil, using exactly the same process, and this is the one. And you can see it's a lot better. There's a couple of things that I've noticed on the original eye. The ridge around the corneal bulge is a bit distracting, so it's sanded down, so that's a lot smoother there. There's still the corneal bulge, but yeah, and this, as I say, I've used a printed pupil that I used from another project. So yeah, so we've got a reasonable result. There is another method to make eyes without pressure pots and whatnot, which I've thought about over the years, but I've never put it into practice. And then more recently, I've just seen somebody online has actually given that a go. So in preparation for the next video, I'm going to give that a go on a large eye. So yeah, so stick around for that one, and we'll see what happens. Alright guys, thanks very much for watching, and as usual, thanks so much for Bentley Advanced Materials for sponsoring this video. They're a great company, they've got great knowledge and great materials, so if you need anything, clay, resin, silicone, whatever, then give the guys a call over at Bentley Advanced Materials and they'll be able to sort you out. But yeah, so onwards and upwards, on to the next video, and I shall see you all soon. Thanks a lot, bye!